Hello, everyone. Can those in the back hear me? The table over there? Can you clap if you can hear me? Awesome. That side over there? Awesome. Alrighty, so welcome everyone. It's great to be here with you today. I am Jose Fuentes. I'm an alum, I'm a trustee, and I'm the chair of the board of the college. Thank you. It is so wonderful to be here with you, celebrating Hampshire's 55th anniversary and also Friends and Family Weekend. It is so great to be with all of you today. And of course, it is a pleasure for me to be able to introduce to you today this discussion titled Urgent and Unbound, the Role of Delivered Large Education in an Age of Rising Authoritarianism. This is a very important topic, of course, and no better place than Hampshire to have this discussion. Like all of you, I'm eager to get this started, so I'm going to introduce our speakers and then we'll get going. First, we have Gary Marcus, who is a leading researcher in artificial intelligence. He's a scientist, best-selling author, and an entrepreneur who founded and was former CEO of the company Geometric Intelligence, which was acquired by Uber. He's a well-known for challenging the contemporary view on AI and anticipating many of the things that now we're dealing with decades before everyone got to it. He's also an emeritus professor of psychology and neuroscience at NYU. He's also the author of 6 books, including his most recent book, Taming Silicon Valley, which was on the New York Times reading list for 2024. And of course, he's also a Hampshire alum, which is fantastic. We also have with us today Dr. Lynn Pasquerella, who was appointed president of the American Association of Colleges and Universities in 2026 after serving as the 18th president of Manholio College. She had the position also before that as provost of the University of Hartford, where she was vice president for academic affairs and the dean of the graduate school at the University of Rhode Island, where she taught for more than 2 decades. She's a philosopher whose work combines the teaching and scholarship of both local and global engagement, public policy, and the philosophy of law. Her most recent book, titled What We Value, Public Health, Social Justice, and Education for Democracy, examines the role of higher education in addressing some of the most pressing contemporary issues in the intersection of ethics, law, and public policy. And last, we have Ken Burns, who is widely recognized as one of the greatest documentary filmmakers of our time, and is the foremost chronicler of the American experience. He has received numerous prizes, including the Emmy and the Peabody Award, and of course, he's also a graduate of Hampshire College, class of 1976.
What date did you say? 71. Fall 71.
He's a fall 71, excuse me, have a typo here. Fall 71.
Good afternoon. I feel like a total imposter here among these extraordinary scholars to talk about higher education. I am, as Jose finally corrected, fall of 71, Hampshire College. As I have said many, many times, I don't recognize the person who came into this college in September of 1971, which is actually the summer, and the person who left in the spring of 75. This experience here was more transformative than anything that I know in my life, and I am so grateful to this college for all that it's given. And I think right now, as we arrive in this incredibly fraught moment, it's nice to be able to have a chance to talk with some knowledgeable people about where higher education is, particularly the humanities. So I want to start off with a story, which is kind of what I do. I recently read an article in the New Yorker by the writer Ann Patchett, and it's a story about a trip she took to Australia and New Zealand following the death of two close friends, one of whom was her mother-in-law and the other was her dog. It culminates in an underground river where she observes glowworms and confronts thoughts of her own death. It's one of those essays that is less about something specific and more about the emotions that it evokes, the thoughts and experiences that seem, in the hands of a good writer, universal. It reminded me of my experiences here at Hampshire. Our studies often took me in completely unexpected directions where I was as focused on the connections being made as I was on the particular subject at hand. Here, I had the freedom and the time to go deep into a subject. For Patchett, the deaths she experienced before the trip opened a space in her that helped to vivify the landscape she was visiting. It's a wonderful piece. I hope you have a chance to read it, seemingly about glowworms, but really about life and friendship, death, and beauty. So, Gary, I want to talk to you, and also to say to you, Lynn, as well, to jump in as well. For me, the essence of college and a liberal arts education is the ability to explore both a subject and the connections between subjects. Hampshire taught me so much, but maybe mostly it's what I was asked to do, to look at the world more intensely. And for many, as we used to say, don't know if it's in common use anymore, many modes of inquiry. You've studied cognitive science and are in the field of intelligence. How did Hampshire influence how you think about those fields?
So I came to Hampshire in part because a gentleman who's sitting over there, Neil Stillings, had written a book about cognitive science with, I think, 7 or 8 different authors who were different faculty members. And I was like, so I got an excerpt of this book before it was even out when I applied to Hampshire. And I already knew that I wanted to study cognitive science, that I wanted to be interdisciplinary. And here was this book where it was actually interdisciplinary. And it was something I never saw again after I was at Hampshire. When I was here, I was so excited to be surrounded by faculty in different disciplines who wanted to teach me how the mind worked from their disciplines, from linguistics, from psychology, philosophy, computer science, and I just loved that. And when I went on to much more famous places, let's say, I found that people would do...
Wait. More famous than Hampshire?
It turns out that some have been around for more years and whatever, but and there's there's like the Koch effect. They were there first, right? Not necessarily better. And they weren't better. They weren't better at understanding the whole from many different disciplines. I got that more here than anywhere else in all of my academic travels ever.
You know, Lynn, I think that my films, I'm a storyteller, that's what I do, and people attribute to me being a historian, which I'm not. I happen to work in history, particularly American history, the way a painter might work in oil instead of watercolors. And what I found in the academic study of history, that there are many sort of fashions of historiography, so narrative obtained for hundreds of years and centuries. And after World War II, understandably, if you kill 60 million people and drop atomic bombs, you need a new model. And so we go through in history and in sometimes bleeding over into English fashions of historiography that are about a Freudian interpretation, a Marxist economic, symbolism, deconstruction, postmodernism, queer studies, Afrocentrism, whatever it might be. And that all of those seemed, as we were trying to tell our stories, which are narratives, only one part of it, only one spoke into the hub. So thinking about the question I asked you, to Gary, what is your thought about the way in which this multidisciplinary approach, the many modes of inquiry, serve us as opposed? I mean, my elevator pitch when I ended up being, I had a work study guide being a tour was, I said, this is like graduate school at an undergraduate level, that you were forced to design your own curriculum, which is the obvious thing, but there's something more about it, which is this interdisciplinary approach.
I think it's absolutely essential today. If we look at the unscripted problems and grand challenges that our students will be facing in the future, of which COVID-19 was emblematic, is clear that we have to take a multidisciplinary perspective on these complex issues, and we need to think not only across disciplines, but across borders.
Yes.
The kind of education that Hampshire offers, I know, because when I was an undergraduate at Mount Holyoke, I took courses at Hampshire. And one of the most compelling courses, my favorite class as an undergraduate, was a comparative religion course that looked at Frederick Douglass, the Bhagavad Gita, and St. Augustine. And it was taught on 3 different campuses. So Frederick Douglass was taught at Mount Holyoke, St. Augustine was taught at Hampshire, and the Bhagavad Gita was taught at Smith. And it taught us to write, speak, and think with precision, coherence, and clarity, to anticipate and respond to objections, to propose, construct, and evaluate arguments. But most importantly, it taught us humanistic identification, the ability to imagine what it's like to be in the shoes of another different from oneself. And that happened on the first day of class when John Grayson, the professor from Mount Holyoke, announced to each of us that no one would be allowed to take notes for the semester, because he wanted us to know what it might be like to be an enslaved individual who couldn't read or write, but had to use oral traditions to pass along information. And that's what we need to be doing, helping our students engage in moral imagination and grapple with the most fundamental questions of human existence.
I noticed in the description of what we're supposed to be doing this afternoon, there was a phrase about us being so connected. I actually think we're sort of disconnected as a result of all of the various things that we have, the tsunami of options that we have. Let me go on and just say, now that we've established the extraordinary intelligence of Hampshire students, I want to go deeper into how, as a country, we're failing students by not exposing them more deeply to the liberal arts and humanities. I had an experience when I was raising money for the first film I made out of Hampshire, history of the Brooklyn Bridge. I became friends with an executive at AT&T, very senior vice president, who one evening lamented. He said that, "I wish that I could convince you to come and work for me." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "We have all of these MBAs who are flooding our zone, and they've been on a pre-MBA path since high school, and they don't know ethics, they don't know how to write a 2-page letter, they know nothing about comparative religions, they know nothing about history, and I can teach you the things that you need to know in order to do this job, but I can never go back and sort of relearn for them what is the essential kind of foundation of the humanities." And we know this, the share of BA degrees conferred in the humanities peaked at just over 17% in 1967. By 2022, it had fallen to just 3.7%. The drop in the 10 years from 2012 to 2022 alone was 24%. I'm told wherever I go, often by major business leaders like this, and it continues to go on, that their most valuable employees and colleagues are those who studied and are interested in the arts and humanities, literature, history, the social sciences. And so the story of this gentleman named Bill Sharwell, long past, has resonated for me for almost 50 years, and yet it's being replicated all the time, this lament that I don't have people who can stick the landing, who can understand the difference. And even from a so-called return on investment, which is what too many parents and guidance counselors and even students pursue, while it may take longer for the liberal arts graduates to recoup their expenses, they do quite well in the long run. So at Hampshire, students design their own course of study. But how is that playing out in colleges and universities across the country right now? Can you take a temperature generally for us of what's happening?
Well, there's a lot happening across campuses. There's a recognition that 87.9% of students who attend college say that they're going to college to get a job or a high-paying position, a career. And yet 95% of students say that getting a job isn't all that matters. They want meaning and purpose in their lives. And I think that's where we are falling short. We have considered this as outside of our purview of belonging to the counseling center or student affairs, instead of integrating it into academic affairs. At AAC&U, my association, we do employer surveys every 2 years, and we ask employers, what are you looking for? And they confirm what you've just said. We want employees who can be adaptable and flexible in the face of change, who are intellectually adventurous, who are lifelong learners, because we know in an age of rapidly changing technology, that means rapid obsolescence. We are going to need a workforce that can respond to this rapid change and speak across differences. And so I think this is a focus that I'm seeing at a lot of institutions, from places like Bates that have a center for the workforce and purposeful work, to Brandeis that just announced that they're starting a new career initiative. Hampshire does it better than anyone else, I think, and I truly believe this, because there's a seamless integration of the curriculum and the co-curriculum, and there's a requirement that students reflect on the meaning and purpose in their lives, in their projects, in the curriculum, every step of the way. And so often, the assignments that we give to students, the hoops that we make them jump through, don't have any purpose behind them. They're not clear what those learning outcomes are. But at Hampshire, that can never be the case. And so it promotes student success.
So can I just follow this? I mean, if people are pursuing a kind of trajectory, a professional trajectory, and yet that trajectory is often at odds with a kind of inner happiness, what are the forces within and without that individual that are working on them in that way? What have we done as a society, as parents, as institutions, and also as individuals, having expectations that don't necessarily do what Emerson said in Self-Reliance? When he declares his psychological independence in Self-Reliance, he says, from now on I will do only what inly rejoices. He invented inly. I had never seen the word before, inly rejoices, and I've always thought that was the key to it. But
yes.
Where is that disconnect? Why are we saying, I'm headed towards this career in law? I actually don't want to do that. I want something else that has more meaning.
Well, we're not making connections between curriculum to career, and we're not addressing this inward joy. For the first time, mental health issues, depression, despair, anxiety have surpassed financial considerations as the primary reason that students are either dropping out of college or not attending in the first place. There's enormous anxiety, a fear of failure, taking risks. My own son, well, I have one son who's with me here who graduated from Hampshire. His twin brother he's in television and film production. And one day when I was president of Mount Holyoke, I was in the library and I was writing a speech, and Spencer was working on his Div 3 on performing blackness. And my husband John, who's an entomologist, was reading a bug book. And Pierce came in and he said, "This is the most dysfunctional family on the planet." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "It's a beautiful day. We should be out there doing things." I said, "Well, actually, intellectual pursuits is a form of doing something." I said, "Don't you have work to do?" "I'm pretty sure." He said, "Mom, those are just gen ed courses, small group communication, intercultural competence. I don't need that. I want to be behind a camera. Why would I ever need to take these courses?" So as luck would have it, his first job in graduate school is with the Jerry Springer Show, which, of course, is every mother's dream, and then helped him realize that we are not, in fact, the most dysfunctional family on the planet. But he called me from the green room one day, and he said, "Mom, I finally get it. I had to go out and buy the talent ties and cigarettes, and then I had to spend the next 2 hours in the green room talking to them." He said, "Now I know why I needed to take courses in small group communication and intercultural competence. But why didn't anybody ever tell me that? I just thought I had to take courses that would help me be a better filmmaker. Well, those courses did, but we're not making clear why we're asking students to do what we're asking them to do. And there was no chance that he was going to drop out of college, even though he felt like I could get a job immediately if he left. But for those who are first generation, who don't have financial safety nets, they are likely to drop out. And so this is the real risk that we're facing in society.
Lynn has just opened up a gigantic hole, driven a truck through this problem so expertly. I remember early on, and I was making a film on Huey Long, and I interviewed Robert Penn Warren. And he looked at me one day, we had become friends, and he said, "Careerism is death," like that, and just scared the hell out of me. And in fact, I have never since then used the word career except in the meta way that I'm doing it now. Instead, I've said my professional life. You're able to perceive the kind of worlds that exert the kind of pressures that people make decisions not in their own best interests, and following through of what we're talking about, where you can, be on a career path, but it's not the thing that's making you happy or healthy. And can you respond to what Lynn is saying?
I mean, my career path is very different from all of this, but my career path is very Hampshire-esque in a certain way, which is that I have stood outside the masses working on artificial intelligence, although I have worked on it myself, and tried to evaluate it critically. And Hampshire gave me the strength to do that even when I had a very minority view. I think in recent months that has changed, and people have been won over to my side view. But I learned to think critically in Hampshire, to not accept what the masses believe, and decide for myself what makes sense. It's hard to inspire people to take the crazy career path that I did, but I think Hampshire does that for a lot of people. I mean, many people at Hampshire come away with completely unique careers rather than just going to be another student in law school or something like that. Some of course do go to law school, but I think so many of us become either entrepreneurs, which I did for part of my career, and which you did in a different way than maybe most. And I decided that I was going to fight for the truth that I saw in AI, even if the world was against me. There's a cartoon with like 1 million people going after one guy, and that was me for like 7 years. It all changed very recently because I kept telling people GPT-5 is not going to be magic, it's not going to be AGI, it's going to be late. And it was late, it was not magic, it was not AGI, and people started literally posting on Twitter Gary Marcus apology forms. There's a whole genre of this. And so, like, it's all actually changed in the last few months. It's suddenly much easier to be me. But being a Hampshire graduate made it a lot easier for the hard part of that, to say, what matters here, what is all of these ideas from different disciplines, how do they factor in? And just to be a little bit more specific about that, I think that I've had a clearer vision about AI than most people, because most people in AI have a vision from one discipline, which is machine learning. And there's the old saying about, to a man who has a hammer, everything is a nail. And so they want to have their machines learn everything without having anything built in or pre-structured or innate. And I come from the cognitive sciences and from cognitive development, where it's clear as day that some things are built in and some are learned. And it's clear as day that thinking is not one thing, but many. And so we have these people with this tool that is very good at pattern recognition, and they think they can do everything with it. Whereas to me, it's obvious that pattern recognition is just one part of cognitive science. I've known that since I was here working with Neil Stillings, 30, 40 years ago. I don't even want to do the math. It's always been obvious that there are many different ways of thinking about thinking. Thinking is many different processes. We have language, we have perception, there's action, and so forth. And so I always looked at this stuff that everybody thought was going to be magic, and I could say, it does this piece of it, but there's a larger picture. Can you not look at the larger picture? And nobody wanted to, and finally they're being pressed to do it. And it's kind of amazing that it's all suddenly changed, but it is a lot of my ability to stand in the position that I did for the last N years started here.
So that critical thinking those different modes of inquiry, they're a kind of curation of experience, right? It's allowing you a certain degree of curation of the tsunami of material that we're being bombarded with.
So that's,
and to make good decisions and selections among all the information systems and locations and places. Is that what you're?
yeah, one thing I learned, some here and a little bit later, was an eye for the critical example in different disciplines. So some people get lost in their own discipline, and they know everything about their discipline, but they don't really know what's important about that discipline. And I think I got some of that from Neil early on, and then grew some of that with Steve Pinker, who was my mentor in graduate school, and a hero of mine, Randy Gallistel, who's in the National Academy of Science. This art of looking at different disciplines and saying, what matters about this discipline for somebody else? And something that's been very helpful to me and to you has been learning to explain those things to others. What is the critical example here? You know, you have all of this detail. It's not all important to everybody, but if you want to explain to somebody else, why are they doing this? Why is this discipline looking at this weird thing in linguistics? Like, why does it even matter? And so, because I've always tried to traffic between the different disciplines, first within the academy and now sort of more publicly, I've always kept an eye for those critical examples. I don't have your flair for the narrative, that's not really my thing, but there are conceptual examples, and I'm always looking for, you know, what is a good example? So I'll give you an example of this, which is one of the things that current AI systems lack is what I would call a cognitive model of the world, or of something else. So cognitive models, like what is inside your head that you understand about something. In the computer science term, that might be a database or something like that. And large language models, which are very popular, don't really do this. And so I've been looking for good examples to illustrate, and I found one, which is chess. So GPT-5 trains on millions of games of chess, because it trains on everything that's on the internet, and there are millions of games of chess. It gets trained on lots of examples of the rules of chess. Wikipedia has them, chess.com. It has whole books like Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess, which is how I learned to be a decent chess player, you know, because they stole all the books. And so that's in the database. And you can ask it questions like, can a queen jump over a knight? And the answer is obviously no, and it can repeat that. But then you have it play chess, and it will actually have a queen jump over a knight. Because it doesn't really have a model of what it's talking about. It's just predicting, as a neuroscientist I was with yesterday put it, content predicting other content. It's using the words, it's seen these sentences before, but it has not ever built an internal model, which is a very complicated concept. By the way, not to toot my own horn, but I have an op-ed today in the New York Times, which is really straight cognitive science. It's explaining one idea, which is the idea of having something that's very general versus something that is specific on particular domains. And so it's another example of like finding the way to explain concepts to others. And in this case, the cognitive science ideas that we were talking about 40 years ago are actually relevant to the entire economy of the world. See, the entire economy of the world is focused on these large language models that actually aren't that good, and we could be doing something else. So I look for clear examples, and I gave two. One was AlphaFold, is a system for predicting the structure, three-dimensional structure of a protein from its nucleotides. It's what won the Nobel Prize, I guess, last year for Demis Hassabis and John Jumper. And so you have this very focused system. It's not a chatbot. The title of the piece today is something like, I didn't write the title, but I think it's chatbots, are chatbots a waste of AI's potential? And chatbots can't solve these complex biological problems. And the other example I gave was Waymo. Waymos actually can drive in San Francisco now, but they don't use a chatbot. They use a very focused, specific system that has perceptual systems. It's very interdisciplinary. It's perceptual systems and reasoning systems and decision-making systems.
I was in a Waymo in San Francisco, sorry for the digression, because it scared me a lot. And I had spent the day walking and giving them wide berth, and then I saw that they seemed to be cognizant of people in the crosswalks, and they stopped. And so that evening, a friend who had an account, I sat in the front seat next to no one, and it was raining, and we got to a light at Van Ness, and it like was riding the gas pedal. It like wanted to go, and was impatient not to go, and I
That's your talent for narratives.
I was deeply frightened by that. Let me move on to the most important thing I think that we ought to consider. It's a question, obviously, for both Gary and Lynn. Colleges and universities are under full assault everything about our higher education system, especially those institutions focused on the liberal arts and humanities, are being attacked. Parents and often students are concerned about the value of education. Businesses are worried that we're not training the future workforce in government, and many conservatives argue that we are brainwashing students. Is there any upside to this moment? Do you see any opportunity in this crisis, which is full-on, big-time crisis? I just came from Brown, which has just taken a principled stand against the assault of their academic and intellectual independence. But you've, from the position of a scholar, but also a college president, and also from a scholar and someone out in the world, what's going on? What's our...
I think this is a moment of opportunity to reimagine and revolutionize higher education in significant ways. But we are at a crucible moment when every aspect of college and university operations is facing an existential threat, and so is our democracy. I'm the current president of the American Association of Colleges and Universities, and our mission is to advance the democratic purposes of higher education by promoting equity, innovation, and excellence in liberal education. We believe that there is an inextricable link between liberal education and our nation's historic mission of educating for democracy. We know from research done by Tony Carnevale and his colleagues at the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce that those who receive a liberal education are much less likely to engage in authoritarian attitudes. They are much more secure when their positions are being challenged. And so we have data showing this, but we exist in a post-truth era where controlling the narrative is often more important than the facts. And the question is, how do we control the narrative by reinforcing and restoring public trust in the promise of liberal education, in particular, but higher education in general? You're right. We are at a moment when public trust in higher education has been at an all-time low. 2015, it was 56% of Americans thought that education was headed in the right direction. It was down to 36% 2 years ago. It's now on the rise. But we have to take seriously the concerns that higher education is too expensive, too difficult to access, doesn't teach students 21st century skills, or, as you've pointed out, bastions of liberal progressivism intent on brainwashing the next generation of snowflakes that will melt at the slightest abrasion of their sensibilities. The current administration has seized upon that narrative and the fact that there's a great deal of skepticism around the value of a college degree and mistrust in higher education to say that higher education in its current form must be dismantled. And we have a vice president who has proposed that Viktor Orban and what happened in Hungary should be the model that we follow. This is terrifying for those of us who believe that the strength of American higher education is dependent upon the free exchange of ideas, the unfettered pursuit of the truth, and independence from governmental intrusion. Our Supreme Court has upheld this notion twice. In 1957, in Sweezy versus New Hampshire, the Supreme Court justices said that academic freedom is not only of paramount value to higher education, but to our democracy itself. And they said for that reason, colleges and universities must have the right to determine for themselves who gets admitted, what is taught, how it is taught, and by whom. Every one of those rights has been upended. And 10 years later, in Kayishian versus Board of Regents, the courts ruled that academic freedom is of transcendent value, reaffirming what they ruled in Sweezy, and that we must guard against casting the pall of orthodoxy across our classrooms. And here, too, we're seeing that pall of orthodoxy with the latest compact suggesting that institutions will not be eligible for federal funding, including financial aid, unless they comply with the ideological mandates of a particular administration. Well, the administration's going to change, presumably, and then so it's an untenable position that colleges and universities are being put in.
So go back to the opportunity and restate it again.
Yeah.
Because everybody's sinking in their chair.
No. No,
It's not
so-
just a post-lunch thing, it's really
Yeah. So the
so
oppor-
existentially threatening.
It is. And so the opportunity is to demonstrate to those who are skeptical and those who are supporters of education alike our value. And, so there was a lot of call for this after October 7th in 2023, when Zeke Emanuel wrote an op-ed for the New York Times saying, either we are unable to teach personal and social responsibility through the liberal education we offer in our classrooms. Either we're unable to do that or we are unwilling to do so. We are able to do that, and we do it quite well. But what we need to do is address concerns by serving as anchor institutions in our communities, which Hampshire is a model of excellence at doing. It's built into your curriculum, it's built into your DNA to demonstrate that our success is inextricably linked to the psychological, social, educational, economic well-being of those in the communities in which we're located and those we seek to serve. If we fail to do that, and we fail to address what Michael Sandel, the Harvard philosopher, talks about as the stigmatization of the poorly educated as the last acceptable prejudice in the United States, we will never be able to create the kinship necessary to change the narrative, whether or not it's true. And my colleague Jessica Riddell, who's a Shakespearean scholar at Bishop's University in Canada, reminds us that the system is broken and it's working exactly as it was designed. But she also enjoins us to engage in hope circuits, to move from this mindset of scarcity to one of abundance and create circuits of hope, not to engage in toxic positivity,
Right.
but instead to talk about how we can use this moment to create new pathways, new solutions that come from these moments of crisis.
Can I take a...
I want you to do it. I just want to add one thing that I felt that too often we assume that the opposite of faith is doubt, and the opposite of faith is actually certainty. And what was so remarkable, Lynn, about your response is that it allowed the other argument to have space and to breathe within the context of a full-throated defense. And I think we appreciate it and know the dangers of certainty. I'm sorry, Gary, please.
No, it's fine. Actually, that helped me formulate it even better. So I did a panel yesterday, which my friend Sandy came to in Montreal with a famous neuroscientist, Carl Friston, who invented a lot of the mathematics behind doing brain imaging in neuroscience. And he's also skeptical of LLMs, as I am, even more so. He called them rubbish, which, for all the negative things I've said, I have never personally said. And part of what he pointed to is that they don't have a good representation of uncertainty. As I told 60 Minutes, they produce what I call authoritative bullshit. There was a whole network memo about how to bleep when I said authoritative bullshit to put it on over the air. But the authoritative part is whatever they say with complete confidence. And I think that the part of the value of Hampshire education was learning about shades of ambiguity. I think the newspaper, even when I was here, was called Shades of Gray, or something was called Shades of Gray. Maybe there was a separate little small paper that a friend and I put out or something. But part of what I learned here is about shades of gray. And I'm going to say something provocative, which is I completely agree this is an existential moment for higher education in America, both because of the authoritarian turn, but also, we haven't really talked about it, because of AI.
That's right.
Because of, everybody's using ChatGPT to write their answers and they're not thinking about them deeply. So here's the provocative thing. I think that the only chance that higher education has is to become more like Hampshire, to teach people to not accept things at face value. And
Why
to
do
try
you think that that's provocative here?
strong.
Yes.
I think that that's the only way that higher education is going to be of value
Yes.
in an era in which students can write their papers with ChatGPT and not engage in them. Just before I came on stage, I got a text from a new friend who's a law student in McGill. And she has this experience tutoring students where if she asks them something like, how did you get to this answer? They'll say, I used ChatGPT. And then she'll probe another level, and they just don't they don't know. They don't know how to ask questions of the output. And so the students are reduced to being relators of things that they prompted into ChatGPT.
Yeah.
This is not what an education should be, clearly. And it was never that at Hampshire. Many schools that I chose not to go to, were about regurgitation ultimately. Like, you have some textbook and you have to memorize all the words in blue or something like that, right? And that was never the Hampshire way. What was really important here ultimately was formulating your own question, persuading your faculty member. It was a negotiation that this is something worth exploring and here's why. And that's what we need students to do, not just at Hampshire now, but everywhere, to find value and to add value in this era in which you can get sort of a half-assed answer really easily and a deep answer with great difficulty.
Yeah, I think there's that joy in sharing the process of discovery that has never left me from here, just that excitement at that not synthetic but authentic kind of pursuit that you've just described. I've got, there's an interesting thing when you both mentioning how well Hampshire does it. I have a dear friend named Richard Miller, who was the former president of Olin College, which is an engineering school.
Some might say it's the Hampshire College of Engineering.
Well, I think if he were here, he would say that, and he would agree with it. He's the chair of a new group called the Learning Well Coalition. Richard have suggested a different, less binary approach to STEM versus the inevitable liberal arts humanities game that everybody's the binary, false binary that people are. And in some ways, the coalition reminds me of what Hampshire has been doing and reminds Richard of what he's now trying to do and what he was able successfully to do at Olin, who's turning out Hampshire-like graduates in engineering, which
I wasn't kidding.
You know exactly what he's doing, right? They're focused on the links between the experiences of higher education and lifelong learning, which includes exposure to the sciences and the humanities, along with the experiential learning and experimentation that they're doing. Maybe you've answered this, but I wanted to move more specifically, Gary, to in a competitive AI-dominated world, how can we give students the time to think deeply, to reflect slowly and follow curiosity? Or is that now just a priori a luxury that we have?
I mean, I think the biggest issue is to motivate the students, which is hard now because it seems so easy to just type something into ChatGPT. Some of that motivation has to come by showing the students the limitations. So I've always recommended not prohibition, but let the students use it, but let them see the limitations of it. So if you ask ChatGPT to write a news article, it's going to make mistakes, and students can see that. If you have it do calculus problems, it will get like 8 right, and it'll be amazing that this machine can do it, and it will get 2 wrong, and then you will realize that you can't trust it. So, some of the motivation has to come from seeing that the tools are not in fact as good as they are portrayed to be sort of on television, where everybody's like, oh, we're not going to need any humans anymore. It's important to remember, for example, that Jeff Hinton, who everybody lauds and who won a Nobel Prize recently, said in 2016 that we might as well stop training radiologists. We actually have a shortage of radiologists. He said deep learning would replace radiologists. It hasn't replaced any. So, often people who are enthusiastic about the technologies don't understand the human factors. They don't understand that, for example, that the vision part that the AI does very well is only a small part of what radiologists do. They have to read files and understand patients as a whole in that particular case. And what we find over and over again, Eric Brynjolfsson has done the best research on this, is that AI tends to replace tasks, individual tasks, but not the whole of what a human does for various reasons, like their lack of reliability, their lack of looking at the big picture, and so forth. So some of it has to be that we motivate the students that there is still something to do. And there's this other piece of it, which is not technical, but motivating students to want to understand the world. If you really want to understand the world, you realize that a chatbot could be a tool that could help you a little bit with that and tutor you on some things, but it's not going to teach you to expand the boundaries of knowledge. And a term I heard for people like us is seekers. We want to seek beyond. That's a really important part of the educational game, is to inspire students to actually want that. If they don't want that, I don't know, what we can do, but we should be trying really hard to want them to to understand the joy of discovering new things in whatever domain they care about.
Lynn, is it possible to swim upstream against this, swift running current of fitting it into ChatGPT or just forgetting the deep pleasures in research, in knowledge, and in putting together ideas and coming to one's own conclusions?
I think it is possible. I worked closely with Rick. I was on his board at Olin and helped him when he was starting this Coalition for Life Transformative Education. And I gave a talk at one of his convenings, and it was on everything, everywhere, all at once, and the ways in which that spoke to this current moment in higher education. But I was thinking about your comments and the transformative power of a Hampshire education, how that still lives inside of you. And my son had the same experience when he attended. And so I was thinking about, when I was teaching at the Brown Medical School, in my section on death and the meaning of life, and then when I was teaching pre-med students at the University of Rhode Island, I would ask them at the beginning of the section to give me the name of their great-great-grandmother, maternal great-great-grandmother, or anything about her. And I would teach large classes, 120 students in each class. Not once could anybody give me any information about this woman. Their very existence was dependent upon her. And maybe it'd be different with Ancestry.com or something. But I would say to them, okay, here's a woman who's responsible for your very existence, who lived maybe 150 years ago. You can't tell me anything about her. You can't even tell me her name. So what hope is there 150 years from now that anyone will ever know anything about you? And if not, does your life now really matter? So this was a very cruel thing to do, I know.
Very popular.
I love it. There are many populations in which shame is a very, very important motivator.
Right. So you can imagine that this section was right before Thanksgiving, so people coming back from Thanksgiving break.
I know.
Parents calling me, yes, what did you do to my child? But inevitably they'd want to know, okay, what's the answer? Is there a meaning of life? And I said, I look at it this way. I find meaning in my life through two things: service to others, and half jokingly I said baseball. And I'm a huge Red Sox fan, so yes, yay.
Now we're getting to the serious part of today's discussion.
Right. But I pointed them to an essay by philosopher Morris Raphael Cohen, who talked about the Jewish immigrant experience with baseball. And he said it provided them with a mystic unity with something larger than themselves. And that's what our students are looking for. A mystic unity with something larger than themselves. That's what Hampshire provided to you, and to my son, and to so many of you here. This is what all colleges and universities must do, not by what we've talked about, asking students to answer questions for which we already know the answers, but applying, integrating knowledge in ways that will serve their communities and help ignite a sense of meaning, purpose, and imagination in themselves.
Well said. I have a film coming out on the American Revolution. We've been working on it for almost a decade and sharing materials with colleges around the country. And on November 19th, a couple days after it's begun broadcasting and available for free, because it's PBS, streaming, we're having what will be, we hope, a national college campus conversation. Our founders were adamant that democracy relied on an informed and educated citizenry. And as you were speaking earlier about the existential threats that an authoritarian government imposing its will within an academic community presents to a democracy, I think you only have to look back to founding documents that the pursuit of happiness, and he could have easily followed John Locke, and essentially they were following John Locke, that it was life, liberty, and property. These were the main tenets. But there was, to us, it seems slightly inscrutable phrase, it wasn't to them pursuit of happiness. For them, it was not the lifelong pursuit of wealth in a marketplace of objects, but lifelong learning. Mm-hmm. And the key word in the phrase is not even happiness, but pursuit. Sort of the activeness of doing that. Democracy itself is active. We're in a more perfect union. These are all things. And what we feel threatened by, it seems to me, is the certainty and the staticness of these proposals. They were interested in the free electron that runs through our film, quite unintentionally on our part, was this notion of virtue that heretofore, a few phrases after Pursuit of Happiness, Jefferson says, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, which is not hard to parse. It just means that everybody up to this point has been a subject. We're inventing something new, a citizen, and the tendency is to devolve and to accept the yoke of tyranny or oppressive forms of government, and that's our big obligation, and that lifelong learning gives you the virtue that allows you to distinguish and discover and therefore be an active and responsible citizen. And I'm not inclined to blame our current situation on the decline of liberal arts degrees. But are we failing to educate students at every level in critical thinking? This is for both of you. I mean, we've used this Hampshire model a lot, and I agree with it, and it's been, as you've suggested, Lynn, internalized in the most intimate and personal as well as professional ways, and there is not a day, if I am not honest, in which I do not apply that to the work that I do. But, you know, what can we, what are the practical things we could take away from this idea of developing critical thinking in the face particularly of the onslaught, but also in general? Because as you say, Lynn, the administration will at some point disappear, shrivel up, die.
I'll take it first. I've been worrying about critical thinking since I was a Hampshire student, partly in terms of the particular kind of ways of looking at the world, but also because my Div 3 was about critical thinking. It was a study in how people form their beliefs, and it demonstrated that people often lose track of where they got the information for those beliefs, and they will make their own reasons to believe the things that they have then become attached to. And I had a conversation with Noelle on the board about it today. She asked sort of, what is the relevance of this now? I mean, I think she knew part of the answer. And it's incredibly relevant now in this land of social media. Because what I showed is that if you want to stick to a belief, you don't care about the evidence anymore, and you will just take whatever other evidence you get. And what social media makes incredibly easy is this kind of echo chamber thing, where it's just incredibly easy to immerse yourself in what we call confirmation bias.
Right.
And incredibly difficult to force yourself to do anything else. What we need to do, and what we talked a little bit about in our Zoom call, is to inculcate in very young children a desire to do critical thinking, an understanding of what it is. There's a curriculum I think you guys actually both know more about than I do, but that I ended my 2008 book, which was called Kludge, about the clumsiness of the human mind. I ended that book by pointing to a curriculum called, I think it's Philosophy for Children.
Yes.
Sounds like you guys actually know it better than I do. I think we need those kinds of projects to teach kids to question things from the beginning, to understand the value of exploring ideas that are open-ended. You know, we have to make people value that from the beginning. By the time they get to college, after they spent 15 years being surrounded by social media, it's late.
Yeah. So Lynn, how then? What is our role and responsibility in higher education to deal with what is clearly a huge problem related to the failures right now in primary and secondary schools? Which follows, I think, on Gary's wonderful answer.
Yes, yeah. I taught a course on philosophy for children with Tom Wartenberg when I was at Mount Holyoke, and we went into the Martin Luther King Jr. School, and we used children's books, Frog and Toad, Morris the Moose, The Important Book, The Giving Tree, and we weren't teaching Kant and Descartes, Hobbes, but we were habituating students to listen critically and with understanding, to not feel threatened if someone disagreed with their particular point of view, to engage in intellectual humility. Imagine that some of your most fundamental beliefs might actually be mistaken, and then to move forward. And this is something that we're lacking. One of the, I think, legitimate criticisms of higher education is that we haven't forced students to sit in their discomfort and to listen critically even when they vehemently disagree, or especially when they vehemently disagree with the person speaking. When we taught this course, at the end of the course, we would have the students, second graders, come onto our campus, and we brought them to the bio lab where they learned about sea urchin reproduction. And we brought them into the chapel, and they learned how organs create sound. And to the art museum, and we asked them to critique 2 paintings because they had read Emily's art. And then we had a little graduation ceremony for them, and they were given buttons that said, "I'm a philosopher," and had Morris the Moose or Frog and Toad on them. Every single one of the students said, "I want to go to college. Tell me, how can I come to college?" I think at a time when we are facing higher education's most serious challenge, which is a growing economic and racial segregation in higher education, we need to create pathways, and we need to pay attention to the ways in which we are closing the doors or the gates to the academy to people in our communities. And then the biggest compliment that we got in teaching this class was when we brought a new group of Mount Holyoke students into the classroom to work with the second graders, and a 4th grader peered around the door, and he pointed down the hall to the second graders, and he said, "Those are the philosophers. They're going to change your lives." And that's all you can hope for as a professor, is to have a 4th grader say they're going to change your lives. This is what we need to do. We need to excite students about learning. We need to help them practice the skills necessary to thrive in college and in life.
Yeah.
Can I add one sentence?
Yeah.
This is an incredibly interdisciplinary problem. It's about changing a culture. We need cognitive psychologists and film majors and so forth to come together to try to change this culture.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I believe that the opportunity to go deep into a subject, a sustained period of study, what we understand as independent study, is transformative for all students. And I think you've all said that for people, but how do we do that and integrate the humanities, sciences, and other fields? Can we create a system like Hampshire that works as a new model at the college level, or does this simply become another luxury item available to those who are either well off or willing to take the risks? And now we know that pool is being narrowed.
I think this is the danger, that we will end up what Jefferson referred to as an unnatural aristocracy.
Right.
We're only the most privileged to have access to the liberal arts traditions. There are some good models. I was on a commission with the National Academy of Arts and Sciences that produced a consensus report called Branches from the Same Tree. And the title is taken from a quote by Albert Einstein, who pointed out with rising fascism in Europe that all knowledge, all wisdom is from branches of the same tree: philosophy, religion, science, and that we must integrate those if we are going to develop as human beings. And there are curricula that focus on integrative applied learning, high-impact practices that allow students to engage from their first to final semester. The kinds of curricular requirements at Hampshire are significant, and they are models of excellence. So the fact that students have to develop their curriculum, have to engage in portfolio work, reflect on the tasks, and have a project that lasts for a semester or more in the Div 3, but also in the 3rd year, engage in community-based projects that serve others and, in the process, grow that personal self.
Do you want to comment, Gary?
Well, when I was here, I think things have changed a bit, but there was the division system. There were 4 divisions. I don't know what the rules are anymore. I think they've changed a little bit. I was just sitting here reflecting that if you could get each student to understand some set of things from each one of those things from multiple disciplines, even just 2, it's really about perspective taking. When I talk about interdisciplinary, I'm really talking about different sciences mostly, cognitive psychology, computer science, linguistics. Just trying to understand even one idea from 2 different people's or 2 different groups' perspectives is an incredibly valuable exercise. I think it's carried me through my whole career, the ability to do that, to say, hey, these guys are asking this question for this reason, and these other people are asking it for that reason. And the more we can get students to do that, the better. And again, it's a complete counter to the social media thing, which is like, you learn what your tribe says. And if you can force people to understand, it doesn't even have to be on like hot and button political issues, but just even simple things like plants. No, that's not, I regret even having said it, but this, any example is going to be horrible. But hey, just look at this from the perspective of, let's say, botany and economics. Right? Just whatever you're looking at, if you can look at it, like, why do these people value different things as they're thinking about this intellectually? I think that's incredibly powerful. And of course, Hampshire pushed people towards that, and traditional education doesn't really, right? You take a class in a psychology department, I can make fun of those because I was in them for 20-some years, and you just learn about that perspective, and you don't really spend time thinking about it. And then all of the rewards of the academy are sort of to do that one thing well. Undergraduate education in particular should really push people beyond that. Take different perspectives. Why do these different sets of scholars see this in a different way, or this political issue in a different way?
I think it's absolutely critical. At Mount Holyoke, I was involved as a leader of a project that was looking at simple engineering solutions for communities in the West Lake District in Kenya, and clean water solutions, sustainable agriculture, entrepreneurship for women in communities that had a 33% HIV rate, 69% poverty index, 80% of the families were polygamous, and they practiced widow inheritance. So a woman was inherited when her husband died by a male relative, or had a jade or a male prostitute brought in to cleanse her of her dead husband's evil spirits. And it didn't matter how many simple engineering solutions we came up with in collaboration with community, because it was a true partnership. If people didn't trust us and they weren't going to use them because they thought that we were there to destroy the culture, it was a community that spoke neither English nor Swahili, and so much of the work we had to do was visual communication. And so we had to rely on the artists on our teams. We had to rely on the humanists who were talking to women in communities that had no constitutional rights, where people were being dragged out of their homes and burned alive as witches. And so how do you create trust when you're not there all year long? That took the psychology students, it took the sociology students. So we can no longer pretend that we can just come up with this narrow technical training and it's going to solve the world's problems. They're much more complicated, and anybody who's been involved in these kinds of hands-on projects knows that it requires interdisciplinary learning.
So one final question for both of you. We've spent a good deal of the afternoon lauding, quite correctly, Hampshire's extraordinary contribution. Where do we, Hampshire, need to go next? We've focused heavily on recently remaking ourselves as an institution in the face of an external and internal existential threat, and at the same time kept very vibrant the idea of an experimenting, ING, place, not an experimental place. As we talked about at lunch, we started learning collaboratives, and we're addressing urgent challenges and that. But what can we do from your perspective as an institution to ensure that our values are baked into everything that we do as we go forward? And is that enough for the future?
I don't know if anything's enough for the future. I mean, being honest, I think it really is a tough moment. I think that Hampshire needs to stay strong to its historical values, which is not to say that it shouldn't change in any way, or that any version of it should be frozen. But these historical values, if you go back to the making of the college and so forth, are really about questioning, about interdisciplinarity, about questioning conventional education, about experimenting. And Hampshire needs to keep to that and to be a voice. There's going to be other voices. We can't be the only voice. We shouldn't try to be the only voice. But we should stick to all of that and show the world that this can still be done at this moment.
I agree. You have to center your values, exercise moral courage. There's an extraordinary amount of moral distress right now where institutional leaders feel coerced into making decisions they believe are unethical, but they feel they have no choice. And in many instances, that moral distress has morphed into a kind of moral injury, which comes from the continual erosion of one's moral compass. So you have to develop moral resilience, and you need to continually revisit the question of how much individual injustice should we countenance for the sake of long-term reform. At a place like Hampshire, the answer is usually none. We are going to do what we believe is right and move forward. I worry that students are experiencing such distress. I've talked about the mental health issues. So we need to take into account this work of one of my colleagues, Sia Sheldon, does on cognitive bandwidth and the ways in which people's capacity to learn is diminished as a result of racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, other forms of discrimination, food and shelter insecurity. But she points out that the biggest bandwidth stealer for students is belonging uncertainty.
Right.
And so we must ensure that each of our campuses are places of welcome and belonging. We must engage in pedagogies of kindness in the classroom and in every aspect of college and university operations, including structures, policies, practices. We must engage in trauma-informed pedagogy and look at the ways in which we are excluding individuals as a result of our adherence to past practices that no longer apply. We can no longer assume, as we have in the past, a blank slate, that people come in without any experience in forming their capacity to learn, to thrive. And we must ensure that we provide mentoring inside and outside of the classroom and change our reward structures so that faculty and staff are rewarded for transforming lives, not in terms of rankings. And I know this isn't an issue for Hampshire, but so much of higher education drives
Right.
prestige through rankings, through how many people we exclude as opposed to how many people we include in this transformative educational experience.
So we are now have 2 microphones in these 2 aisles, and we're happy for the next few minutes, 20